Okay, some of you may have seen in the news earlier this week that the Green Party MP and former Green Party leader, Caroline Lucas, was one of a group of people, about 25 people, who were arrested at an anti-fracking demonstration in West Sussex, at a place called Balcombe in West Sussex, where the company Quadrilla is starting to do drilling work, as a precursor to starting to engage in fracking in the area. And, Mrs. Lucas being arrested made me think, because it seems like the campaign against fracking and the campaign against fracking is becoming more and more and more serious. If you've got MPs being arrested, then you're talking about something that is serious. What is fracking? Well, if anyone doesn't know what fracking is, basically it's a way of extracting shale gas from rock, which involves drilling down into the earth and then firing powerful chemicals mixed with water into the rocks to release the gas. And why are so many people opposed to it? Why is the Green Party opposed to it? Well, basically the danger is, first of all, that this kind of drilling work could potentially cause minor earthquakes, which in fact it already has. There was one in the north of England, somewhere near Blackpool. But also the fact that the chemicals they're pumping into the earth, could potentially be, highly polluting. And of course, companies like Quadrilla will say, "Oh, but it's all very safe. It's all very safe." Well, yeah, they would say that, wouldn't they? But if you're if you're pumping chemicals, toxic chemicals into the earth, even if it's right down into the ground, these chemicals are going to stay there, and they have a habit of, getting to the surface in time. So, they might give these reassurances that it's all safe, but they would do, wouldn't they? They want to make huge amounts of money out of it, and people will say anything if there's money involved in it, so fracking is becoming increasingly a major issue. But there are some more, apart from the issue of fracking itself and the pollution and so forth, there are more serious issues at work here. The main one being the right to peaceful protest. I mean, in a democracy, surely local people have the right, or should have the right, to decide what goes on in their local area. Well, forget it. I know from experience that is no longer the case in modern Britain. Local people have very little say at all in what goes on in their local area. Be it imposing massive housing estates on the countryside where they're not wanted, to imposing fracking on local areas where the local people are opposed to it, whether it be building the new high-speed rail network and rail line through the countryside where it's not wanted. Local people have hardly any say in Britain, because as far as the political class are concerned, what democracy means is you simply having a vote every 5 years to choose between three major parties who believe virtually the same thing. And that's their definition of democracy. And the idea that democracy means listening to the views of a range of people and listening to the views of people locally over local issues seems to be completely out of the political arena now. And the fracking protests are just one example of this. But it's a growing threat. And if you, live in a village or live in a rural area, don't be surprised in a few years' time if you don't wake up to the sound of drilling. And the fracking companies have moved in, and don't expect to have any say in what goes on. So I can quite understand, because of the nature of the planning system being so loaded against local people having a say, and local councils being perfectly willing to collude with developers at every opportunity, especially Liberal Democrat local councils, I can totally understand why people engage in peaceful protest. Now, obviously, I'm not encouraging or wouldn't encourage anyone to break the law, but the law needs to be flexible enough to allow people to engage in peaceful protest without breaking the law. That's how I see it. And sending the police in as some kind of hired thugs by a private company goes completely against the British tradition of peaceful protest. It's the sort of thing that you find in Eastern Europe and Russia. It's not the sort of thing you expect to find in Britain, but is now increasingly the case. And arguably it's been like that since the 1980s, and some people would cite the miners' strike and things like that. But the use of the police for political reasons is a growing menace, and it will happen more and more and more with local planning decisions. We might as well call this, the United Kingdom of New Russia or something, because that's the way it's going. And the arrest of Caroline Lucas, encapsulates that. The fact that the right to peaceful protest is being eroded in Britain, especially on local issues like fracking. In terms of the issue of fracking, some of you watching this video might be sat there saying, well, what's the alternative? We've got to get our energy and power from somewhere. What's wrong with fracking? Well, the problem is the potential threat to the environment of all the pollution that it creates. What's the alternative to it? Well, nuclear power has its obviously its own problems to do with potential pollution. And then, of course, there's wind farms. Wind farms are very controversial at the moment because people don't like them, they see them as blots on the landscape, onshore wind farms, I mean, and they see them as part of the industrialisation of the countryside. I share some of those concerns. And, I can understand why people want these kind of wind turbines in the distance if it's a nice country view. But what it's a case of doing is asking, well, which is the least or the lesser of the evils? What would you rather have? Mass pollution of the countryside and drilling sites everywhere in the countryside, massive great thumping nuclear power station next to you, or a few wind turbines? And it's more than that. I mean, if you live in a rural area, the big threat to your rural area now isn't necessarily just from energy provision. It's from massive housing estates being imposed on you. Massive great ugly housing developments by Nick Boles, the planning minister, and the Liberal Democrats. What would you rather have? If you're going to basically be done over, I'd much rather have, near my little village, a few wind turbines in the distance, sat there in a field, which is still a field, and you've still got cows sort of sniffing around them. I'd much rather have that than have 5,000 houses imposed on the area and the complete and utter urbanisation of the countryside, the destruction of wildlife habitats, and the complete obliteration of that countryside forever. And it would be nice to see the people that get so whingy and irate about wind turbines actually getting out there and campaigning against these unwanted housing developments, and also getting out there and campaigning against things like fracking, because to be honest, there's things that you might consider negative, and there's things that are highly negative in terms of the ecological effect they have on the environment. And on a scale of 1 to 10, wind farms are probably about 2 or 3, but fracking and kind of creeping urbanisation are 10 out of 10, and I know where my priorities lie. And so in terms of where I stand on this, I have every sympathy with Caroline Lucas and those people who are getting out there and campaigning against fracking, and you know, we need in this country to make a stand, and campaign for the right to engage in peaceful protest. Even if it's peaceful protest by those people who want to campaign against wind farms. If that's what you feel, should have the right to protest about it. And we all need to stand up and campaign for the right to peaceful protest, because if we don't do it, 10 years' time, Britain will be the new Russia. Anyway, thanks for listening.